Ladies and gentlemen, everyone thinks they understand Johnny Bravo. You know, big hair,
Hey, baby.
sunglasses,
I know what you're thinking. How did the statue get off its pedestal?
the little, macho poses,
Well, surprise. I'm real.
gets launched in the stratosphere by all of the women he tries to hit on.
Sugar nip.
And everyone has more or less the same take, that he's a parody of toxic masculinity. You know, this dumb macho guy who gets what he deserves, and that Johnny Bravo's a feminist cartoon. Hear me out though, that take isn't necessarily wrong, but that's in the more shallower end. Because there's a philosopher, and to keep the tradition, the philosopher is again French.
Bonjour, you cheese-eating surrender monkeys!
Whose work takes you to the deeper end. And in there, Johnny Bravo stops being a joke about a man who objectifies women. There he becomes something a lot weirder. A man who objectifies himself. Voluntarily, for that matter, enthusiastically even. Before any person ever gets a chance to objectify him. I think that's a really interesting case to study. Quick pause. If you're a returning viewer, hi, welcome back. You already know the drill. If you stumbled in here off the algorithm though, hi, my name is Amariza. I take philosophy and run it through pop culture, cartoons, TV, video games, all those stuff, and try to pull out some sort of meaning out of it because we usually don't think too deep about that. So if a French philosopher explaining a Cartoon Network himbo sounds like your kind of thing, subscribe and drop a like. It genuinely tells the algorithm to show this to more people like you. Alright, back to the man in the black shirt. The philosopher is Simone de Beauvoir. The book is called The Second Sex. And before I take a single idea from it, I need to be straight with you about what this book is. Because the whole video depends on getting this one thing right. The Second Sex is not a book of general life advice that happens to mention women. It is a nearly 700-page book about one specific thing. What the world does to women. De Beauvoir is not describing what women are. She's describing what women are demanded to be by law, by economy, by religion, by every institution she could get her hands on. That distinction is the entire book. Miss it and you've misread her whole book. So here's her diagnosis. And notice every sentence of it is about the demand, not about women. She says, nobody is born knowing how to be what the world calls a woman. Her most famous line actually is, one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. Meaning, the softness, the delicacy, the decorativeness, the endless agreeableness. All of those, de Beauvoir argues that is not biology, and none of that is what a woman is. It's a costume that the world puts on women at birth and then tells them that this is what you're supposed to be. Go be it. And the world enforces this costume with a structure. She says society casts men as a subject, the one who acts, chooses, builds, moves through the world doing things. And then, on the other hand, society puts women as the other, the one who is looked at, the one who's defined, judged, decorated. The other gets to be a noun while the subject gets to be a verb. And living as a noun has a shape, and she names that shape. She splits existence into two modes, transcendence and immanence. Transcendence is when you push forward, you become something you weren't yesterday. And then immanence is when you repeat the same task on a loop, where effort never actually accumulates into anything. Her example for immanence is a housewife. Dishes get dirty again, floors that need mopping again, a life of maintenance instead of building and becoming. And her point is not that women are suited for repetition. It's that the world locked women out of projects, forced them into maintenance, and then pointed at the cage it built around them and called it their true nature. And the lock in that cage is a myth. She calls it the eternal feminine, the idea that woman that society has built it is a fixed, timeless essence, decorative, unchanging, because here's what a myth is for. Once you've frozen a person into an image, you never have to deal with that person ever again. Although de Beauvoir wrote a chapter called The Eternal Feminine, she never wrote a chapter called The Eternal Masculine. And there's a reason, and that reason matters a lot. In the world she was describing, nobody was doing these things to men. Men were the subjects. Men were the ones defining, the ones judging, the ones mythologizing. There was no machine pointed at them, there was no machine freezing them into decorative objects. Which is exactly what makes Johnny Bravo so eerily strange and interesting at the same time. For you see, Johnny Bravo is a man standing next to that machine, the same machine that the Beauvoir spent 700 pages describing, the same machine that history aimed at women against their will. And Johnny Bravo is going into that machine voluntarily, and he's happy about it. He even pulls the lever to start the machine himself.
Mama warned me about women like you. I was hoping she was right.
Look at how Johnny Bravo actually spends his time. He's not necessarily chasing women. That's, the whole surface gag. Underneath it, he's combing his hair. He's checking mirrors. He's flexing at his own reflection. He's holding poses for nobody, for himself. The most consistent, most devoted relationship in Johnny Bravo's life is between himself and the reflection of his image in the mirror.
Hey, who's that handsome guy? Hello, 911 emergency. There's a handsome guy in my house. Oh, wait a second, cancel that. It's only me.
And the tale that gives the whole game away, watch what happens when a woman actually shows up. He doesn't get curious about that woman. He doesn't ask her a single real question. What Johnny Bravo does is he points at himself, he flexes, he delivers a catchphrase about himself. That woman was never the object of his desire. She's the audience for his performance. He's not looking at her. He's checking whether she's looking at him or not. Johnny Bravo is not a subject pursuing objects. Johnny Bravo is an object recruiting witnesses. And just like we talked about Homelander in the previous video, they have some big similarities over here. See, Johnny Bravo filed himself by choice under the exact category the world forced onto women. Image, essence, a thing to be, looked at, He took the cage and he kind of mistook it for a throne. And right there is where the show gets smarter than almost everyone who's ever written about it. Because there's the question. The Beauvoir's version of this story, a person frozen into an image, locked in a repetition, that story is a tragedy. It's one of the most serious books ever written. So why is Johnny Bravo funny? It's the same condition, the opposite gender. Why? There's only one word here: consent. When the myth is imposed, when the costume comes with your birth certificate, when refusing it costs you your income and your safety and your exit, that's true tragedy. There's no joke in a locked door. But when a man with every door open for him, the subject position, the freedom, the benefit of every doubt the world is able to offer him, and he walks past all of it, climbs into a cage, and locks it from the inside, and then poses through the bars like he's won something and he's dancing in a cage, that is the structure of a farce. This is imposed tragedy, but self-imposed tragedy, if that makes sense. Every laugh in Johnny Bravo runs on that engine. We're not laughing at the condition. The condition where it was forced on people was a historical crime. We're laughing at a volunteer, at a man who was handed the one thing the myth's actual victims were denied: the choice. And he used that choice to go into a cage. And once you see that, the show's whole world snaps into focus. Because look at who the show hands the subject position to. The women in that show all have somewhere to be. That's the thing about them. They enter a scene mid-errand, they have jobs plans, they have these lives in motion. They assess Johnny in about 4 or 5 seconds, they render judgment, and they leave. Back to their projects. They act, they choose, they move. In the Beauvoir's terms, they are the subjects of this show. Full stop. So Johnny Bravo gave that power to the women. And Johnny is the other, the looked at, the judged, the decorative object. Watch his body, his poses, his grooming routine. The most objectified thing on any given frame of Johnny Bravo is actually Johnny Bravo. So a kid's cartoon in 1997 quietly ran the inversion. It handed its women the position the world had denied them, and handed its only man the position women were forced into, except with the door wide open. And then it watched them refuse to leave. Every single episode. For years. Which honestly raises another question. The rejections never stop. The walls he gets launched through never stop. Any organism learns that. You can literally Pavlov a bacteria to learn that. But why can't Johnny Bravo learn that he is objectifying himself? See, because learning would require Johnny Bravo to believe there is something about himself that could change. And his entire operating system is built on the opposite belief. Let's go back to the Beauvoir's line, the one where she says, one is not born but becomes a woman. Her deepest claim, the one under all the others, isn't about women only. It's that nobody is born as a finished essence. Everything a person is gets built out of choices, out of time, and is never done. That's the human condition in one sentence. You are a becoming, not a being. Now, aimed at Johnny Bravo, one is not born a man either. One becomes one, or doesn't. Manhood, on this view, isn't a position you're issued at birth. Neither is womanhood. It's a project. It's an ongoing, unfinished project. Johnny Bravo does not believe that. Johnny Bravo believes he was born complete. The hair, the pecs, the moves. In his head, these aren't things he does. They're what he is. That's his essence. And what he is arrived finished, needing only maintenance and applause. Ask Johnny to change, and you're not asking him to adjust his behaviors. You're asking him to admit that man is something you build, and if it's something he builds, it's something he can fail at. Not fail to display, fail to build. So basically every rejection bounces off of him, because a rejection is information, and Johnny cannot receive information about himself. Information is for people who are still under construction. Johnny has declared the construction finished a long time ago. The women launching him through walls aren't actually teaching him lessons. From inside his head, they're just an audience with bad taste that he will eventually find his own correct audience. You can't teach an essence. You can only impose that, and he doesn't understand it. And now this show's format stops being a format and becomes a sentence. Think about the structure of every episode. Johnny performs, Johnny gets launched through a wall, episode ends. And the next one opens with a full reset. Nothing carries over, no bruise, no memory, no growth. Still living with his mom, still the same poses, the same hair, the same everything. See, if you remember, we talked about imminence, repetition, where effort never accumulates. The housewives' dishes, as the Beauvoir said, these endless maintenance of a state instead of building a life. Johnny's flexing is his dishes. Him combing his hair is the dishes. The poses he strikes is the dishes. Nothing builds in Johnny Bravo's life. Nothing becomes. The episodic reset, the thing every 90s cartoon did just as convention, is for this character a perfect philosophical prison. A man who chose to be an essence instead of a becoming gets exactly what an essence will get. Eternity. Frozen in syndication. Forever. And now we're at a part where I like to stop talking about the cartoon and get a lot deeper into philosophy. Because a man who turns himself into an image maintains it obsessively, performs it for an audience, mistakes attention for love, and cannot receive any information suggesting the image should change. You know him, he's not Johnny Bravo. We all have at least one of those guys in our feeds, on our Instagram, Snapchats, in social media. That gym account that stopped being about strength and became about the pump pics. The looks-maxing forums on Reddit rating jawlines like livestock. The Sigma male pipeline. And listen to the vocabulary they say: grind, stone face, never soften, be the image. An entire online economy selling young men the exact product Johnny bought. Masculinity as an essence. A fixed thing. You either have or you fake. Being a noun. All that fucking Andrew Tate bullshit. And honestly, that's just sad. And notice what this actually is. In the Beauvoir's terms, nobody imposed this on these men. No law, no economy, no birth certificate. The door is wide open for you to go and seize your identity. They are volunteering for objecthood, at scale, on subscription. The price is the same price that Johnny pays, and it hasn't changed. The moment you accept real man as this fixed essence, you inherit both halves of the curse. You become a thing to be rated, an image that needs maintenance, and you lose the ability to learn. Every failure has to bounce off of you. You can't grow anymore, because letting a failure in would mean admitting you're unfinished. The manosphere's word for that condition is unshakable. The Beauvoir's word for that self is imminence. And since y'all know I love irony, the biggest irony is that this is a corner of the internet that talks endlessly about women being vain and obsessed with appearance and gold diggers while grinding themselves voluntarily, even joyfully, into the most decorated, phony, looked at, appearance-obsessed object in the online economy. Johnny Bravo with a podcast mic, who's calling other people shallow for that matter. And look, I know some of you are gonna disagree with that read, maybe heartily. Good. Tell me in the comments, where does the line sit for you? When does working on yourself tip over into becoming the image? Because I have my answer. I just gave it out to you. But I genuinely want to see where you land, and I read every comment personally. So what's the way out? Because we're not here to diagnose. We're here to figure out something more than just a diagnosis. Here's the thing the feminist cartoon Men Are Bad reading completely misses. The second sex doesn't end with an attack. It ends with an offer. And the Beauvoir is explicit that the offer is for everyone. Her argument at the very end of the book is that the myth diminishes both sides of it. That a world where one half is frozen into essence deforms the other half too. And that tearing the myth down isn't women winning something from men. It's everyone getting the same deal. No essence, no archetype, no finished self you were supposed to already be. Just becoming for everybody. That's the whole offer. And if one is not born a man or not born a woman, there's no finished thing. You're allowed to be under construction. You're allowed to take the hit, receive information, change. Failure stops being evidence against your manhood or womanhood or personhood, because personhood was never a possession failure could confiscate. It's this project that we're all entangled in our own way. It only exists in the doing. Johnny Bravo's curse was never the rejections he got from women. A becoming person turns rejection into his fuel. Johnny Bravo's curse is that he decided sometime before the first frame of the first episode that he was already complete. And a complete thing cannot grow. It can only be maintained, and maintained, and maintained over and over and over again. A pompadour is always gonna need combing. That's not a hairstyle. That's a really bad hairstyle. Please don't do pompadours. The door's open. Don't sit in the cage, guys. This has been an analysis of Johnny Bravo. My name is Amir Reza, and I will see you in the next one.
Okay, but I warn you, I'm very ticklish.